is no longer working in what, Roscoe?
Yeah.
Roscoe. And we thought her replacement was going to be Stephen DeFreitas. So the list that you have in your packet has Stephen's name on it. However, Stephen is actually going to be represented by his wife, Abby DeFreitas. So Abby, we welcome you to this committee. Thank you for being here. And so this listing of committee members that you have is now wrong. I'll make sure that it gets corrected for the next meeting to put Abby's information in there. And again, thank you for being with us and welcome. Agenda item number 3, just to go through kind of where we are with the meeting schedule. This is our 3rd meeting. It was supposed to be our 4th meeting. Again, for those of you who have been with us, we've handled some general kind of overview presentation of how the process is going to be run. We had representatives from the State Education Department here at our first meeting to provide us with some direction and support, and we did introductions at our meeting on March 1st. We then met on April 22nd, and we talked about enrollment projections, enrollment history, student enrollments, as well as the future projections for enrollment. And on May 16th, we were going to handle facilities and transportation. That's the meeting that got canceled. I will tell you that we had some discussions about trying to reschedule. And we just weren't able to. I mean, spring is a busy time when the weather gets nice and Little League baseball starts. It's very difficult to get people together. Besides that, frankly, I'm pretty busy. Deb is also busy. We just didn't think it was going to be worthwhile to try to schedule a meeting, not knowing the calendars of the 18 people on the committee. So we tried, but have decided just to move it to this date and handle facilities and transportation as part of our main conversation tonight. If we have time, we'll handle the first part of kind of the staffing overview for this study and finish up the financial aspects of staffing with the finance presentation at our next meeting. So we still have time to get through and cover, we believe adequately, the content. So that's not an issue. Because we had a canceled meeting doesn't mean we're missing something, you're missing something. We're going to skip over something. It doesn't mean that at all. We'll do the same thing we would have done if we had that meeting. We've asked you to set a little bit longer time aside tonight so we can get some additional information done. And if you feel that at any point in the next month or month and a half that we are going too fast, that you don't understand what we're talking about, that you don't feel like you've had time to talk amongst yourselves about this whole study, whatever, if you feel like it would be beneficial to schedule another meeting because of the one that was canceled, we are open to that. Our suggestion would be let's kind of keep going, see where we are, and then make that decision later on down the road. Because while we're open to coming back together, if you feel we need to do that, we certainly don't want to meet just to meet. Nobody wants to do that. Especially when it's 70 and sunny. So we'll, as we go through this, if it just hasn't been enough time, we'll regroup, find another date somewhere and get back together if we feel that's needed. So by the time we get to the end of the evening on June 28th, we will have covered the 6 major areas that we talked about from the beginning on enrollment, academic and extracurricular program, facilities, transportation, staffing, and finances. We'll hit all those areas. And then if we are satisfied that everybody's kind of with us, then on July 25th, we'll get back together for the last formal committee meeting where we will ask the committee to review the draft of the report that Deb and I are writing kind of as we go along. So that's the schedule. We're still on target. We have a little time on maybe a couple of days, try to get it done. If we're good, we're good. And if we're not, we'll figure out another meeting somewhere. Does that sound okay to people? Are you ready for that? Okay, let's see where we are, we'll go from there. Okay, so that's agenda item number 3. Let me take a breath. Questions, committee, so far? Still with me? Okay. All right, then let's go to number 4. Number 4 is, oh no, it's not up there. Number 4 is just a question. Anybody have any issues with the notes that we sent out after the April 26th meeting? Committee members, any problems, anything wrong with the notes from the last meeting? Okay, not hearing anything, we'll assume they're okay. We don't formally vote, but just want to make sure that we've got things pretty well in shape. Okay, so then we go to number 5, and number 5 are the takeaways from the April 26th meeting. Again, for those people who are here for the first time, we cover a ton of information in these meetings. And when we finish, we hope that this ton of information kind of forms the foundation for what we want people to remember. And with 20 different slides on any topic, there may be 3 or 4 things that we hope people remember. And those, we call those takeaways. So again, what was probably an hour and a half or 2 hours worth of presentation at the April meeting, these next 2 slides are kind of the takeaways, the big picture things that we learned from those presentations. And I'm certainly not going to read this to you, but these are the enrollment takeaways. And essentially, what these takeaways tell you are that number 1, the enrollments in both Livingston Manor and Roscoe have been declining. That as we look out into the future, at least for the next 6 or 7 years, those enrollments are going to continue to decline. And understand that the farther out we go, the more difficult it is to predict enrollments because we don't know how many babies are being born each year, basically. But there's nothing that would indicate anything other than enrollments in both districts have gone down, and it's anticipated that those enrollments in both districts will continue to go down. Bottom line, if you can remember that for enrollment, we're having a good night. That's the big picture. That's what we want you to remember. Then we spent a lot of time talking about the extracurricular and the academic program, and these are kind of the takeaways from that presentation. And the interesting thing about this is these takeaways were not things that Bev and I developed. These, if you'll remember, committee, we asked you to meet in small groups at the end of the last meeting and share with us what you thought the major points were from that presentation on program. So this is what the committee came up with. Number 1, there's a lot of similarities in the programs that the 2 districts offer. Not the same, but there are a number of similarities. If these 2 school districts were to merge, there is the opportunity to create some savings by creating some efficiencies, where you would have a larger school district compared with 2 smaller school districts. It does generate some efficiencies. As 2 school districts merge, there are more opportunities for students that become available, both in terms of their course offerings as well as extracurricular opportunities. Merged schools provide more opportunities for their students. That the class sizes, even if we merge classes, the way we laid out what a merged district might look like, the class sizes are still very reasonable. There's nothing that puts 30 or 40 kids in the class, keeping about the same size classes as we have currently. There are the opportunity to create some efficiencies, very good possibility that there would be no people, even though there would be efficiencies, it probably could be accomplished in such a way that no one would involuntarily lose their job in terms of the staff reduction. So similar programs. If there is a merger of the 2 districts, there will be more academic opportunities for students. There'll be more extracurricular opportunities for students. with class sizes about where they are right now, and with efficiencies resulting in more cost-effective programming could occur should the school districts merge. Talked about there being pluses and minuses in every merger study. It's not unusual that in the program area, it's usually a plus, because if you put more students in the same building, the numbers of opportunities for those students always go up. So what we find here is not at all unusual. So those are the takeaways as outlined in agenda item number 5. Let me stop committee. Any takeaways that we didn't include that you remember from the last meeting that should be talked about? These ringing a bell committee, is this have some familiarity to it's coming back like it was yesterday? No. At least makes me sense. Remember that. Okay. All right. Well, then, if there are no questions or comments, let us proceed right into our topic for this evening. Lauren, where do we stand with the remote group? Is there anything I need to do or announcements?
No, they're rolling. We're good.
We're good.
They're
We're
with
good.
it.
They're with us.
Okay, perfect. Welcome, remote group. So that's last meeting. Here's this meeting. Tonight we're going to begin our conversation talking about facilities. And the first thing that we look at is kind of an overview of the two school buildings in Livingston Manor and Roscoe. What we find, again, pretty clearly, is that to no one's surprise, we have two old school buildings, which is fine. But the year of the original building in Livingston Manor is 1938, and Roscoe is 1940. So we have two school buildings that are both 80 years old. They're both roughly the same. Roscoe is smaller, with about 70,000 square feet, compared with Livingston Manor, bigger district, more kids, bigger school. Not surprising. Both pre-K through 12, one building in each district houses the whole program. Both 2 floors. You see the number of students. Again, more students in Livingston Manor and in Roscoe, just about double. Livingston Manor, again, being the bigger district. Both buildings rated as satisfactory. Always things to be done in a school, but certainly safe for students and staff to be in, as identified by the architects. So that's just an overview to look at the types of buildings we're discussing. And much like everything else we talked about, the enrollment projections, the program pretty similar. One district's bigger, one district's got more kids, the same district has got a bigger building, but it's not as if you've got one building that was 5 years old and the other one that's 80 years old. They're both old school buildings, very similar again. Okay, so the next task is to look at how these rooms in these buildings are being utilized. And let me begin by saying that there's no single definition about how big a classroom is. If you were to ask somebody at the state education department and how they approve the size of school buildings, they will tell you that a classroom's average elementary classroom is 770 square feet. Well, life just isn't that simple. You look at a set of floor plans and you look at something that looks like it might be able to hold a class and it might be 700 square feet. And you look at another building that might be 900 square feet. So understand that what goes into this analysis is really about trying to determine how many, what we would call full-size classrooms exist. Realizing again that not every classroom is exactly the same size. So this table, you will see the second column is the number of full-size academic classrooms for Livingston Manor. This is for Livingston Manor first. And you can see there are pre-K classrooms and kindergarten, first and second grade. You get the idea. Then the next column is how many other full-size classrooms there are other than for core academic areas. And so when you look at the specials like home economics, there are some special ed classrooms. Again, I don't have to read this to you, but these are off the floor plan what the number of special ed classrooms would be. To the right-hand column is just much smaller rooms. What are smaller rooms used for? Oftentimes they might be used for speech therapy. They might be used for a psychologist's office. They might be used for storage. But they're not the kind of room, and again, they have different sizes also, but they're not the kind of room you would put a fourth grade class in or an algebra class, not quote unquote full size. So those are really the three, those are the three columns that we talk about as we do an analysis of what's going on in Livingston Manor. The key to facilities planning is to look at full-size classrooms. The column on the right, we put it in so we account for the rooms. But what you're really looking at is how many full-size classrooms do we have to locate elementary classrooms, algebra classrooms, social studies classrooms, some of the specials. Not is there a 8x8 room that we can use to store paper. There's always an 8x8 room to store paper. And you could always use another 8x8 room to store paper, even if you got 4, you could use 5. But that's not what this is about. This is about, again, locating those big spaces. So for the core academic classrooms, you can see Livingston Manor has 27 full-size classrooms for core academic areas and 16 specials used for these purposes. This is the important number. Livingston Manor has 43 full-size classrooms. Now, again, somebody could look at the same floor plans I looked at and said, you know, you really should have counted this one, or maybe you shouldn't have counted that one. There's only 44, not 45, or 43, or 40. Yes. Yes. There are roughly 45 classrooms, 43 classrooms in Livingston Manor. Does everybody get the concept of what we're showing on these tables and why that full size idea is important? Don't worry about whether it's a second grade classroom or an algebra classroom, because what it is today doesn't necessarily mean that's what it's going to be next year, whether you merge or not. You never know, people get moved around all the time. So the idea is not to focus on, is that sixth grade or is that geometry? The question is it a full-size classroom? Would you put a class in there? And Livingston Manor's got 43 of those places. Same thing with Roscoe. Same table for academic classrooms. You'll notice that here there's one section of all the elementary grades in Roscoe, whereas if you compare that with Livingston Manor, there are multiple sections at elementary grade levels, multiple classrooms for first grade, second grade, third grade. In Roscoe, there's one per grade level. And the secondaries. Here are these specials and the other classrooms. Here are the smaller rooms. But again, what's the important point? The important point is that there are 16 classrooms that are full size for academic reasons and 16 more for specials and other kinds of classes. So bottom line here is, and this is the important number, there are 32 full-size classrooms in Roscoe. So those are the important numbers. So as we think through the future of facilities, again, with all of this data up here, I expect you to remember, here's what we do want you to remember. Livingston Manor's got 43 full-size classrooms. Roscoe's got 32. If the districts merge, you've got 75 classrooms, 43 plus 32 to work with. 75. Again, some people would say, oh no, 73, and some would say 77. Okay. It's not 60 and it's not 90. It's in that range of, about 75 rooms. So that's what we want you to cement right now. Is if the districts decide to merge, you got 75 classrooms to work with, 43 in Livingston Manor and 32 in Rossville. Okay, so let me stop there, take a breath. Questions on what I've done so far? Okay. Okay, well then let's move on. So that's really important piece number one. Important piece number two. I'm changing gears. Forget that, cement it, we're moving on. Point number two. New York State is very, very concerned that students and staff work in school buildings that are safe. And we know there's 100 components that go into determining what safe means. But New York State is committed to providing safe and adequate spaces for students to learn and staff to work. And so they have created this system which they call a building condition survey, whereby every school district in the state is required every 5 years to have architects and engineers go through their buildings and say, you gotta fix this. Here's another thing that isn't urgent, but within the next 5 to 10 years, you have to pay some attention to it. And they come up with this list of things. It's not dissimilar from you walking through your house when you get home tonight and saying, this sink still works, but it's from the 1920s and it looks like heck, and I really wanted to replace it for years. Doesn't have to be done tomorrow, but it's something on my list. Or we've got this little leak in our roof. I don't want to replace the whole roof. I can do something about that little leak. You'd find 15 of those things if you walk through your house tonight. Wants and needs. And that's really what this system is. Required every school district, every 5 years, report filed with the state education department by these architects and engineers who do an assessment on the buildings. The most recent look at this information from the architects and engineers lists these things that in both districts somebody should be paying some attention to. Again, doesn't mean that it's got to be done next year, doesn't mean it's got to necessarily be done in 10 years, but somewhere in the future, schools are going to have to pay attention to this. Again, it's no different than your house. You have to pay attention to your house. You constantly have to assess it and make improvements. That's the same thing that's going on here. One difference is it's a little more expensive to do it in the school than it is in your house. No question about that. So this is a listing of things that somebody should pay some attention to in terms of future facilities planning. And that's what this is about. Future facilities planning. Not tomorrow's plan. But bottom line, at some point in the next X number of years, it's recommended that there be about, look at the, again, we're bottom line people, big picture, about $70 million worth of work being recommended for these two schools. Again, you can look at this list and say, there's no money in here to put in a new swing set at the playground, and I think we need that. Or you could say, I think we need to fix the sidewalk outside of this building or that building. I don't think we really need to. Again, that's not the purpose of this. The purpose of this is to say, architects and engineers who do this for a living have come up and said, at some period of time, you got some work to do, about $70 million worth of stuff. So as you think about the future, keep in mind that this $70 million figure is out there. So this is really point number 2. Point number 1 is we got 75 classrooms to work with if there's a merger. And number 2, there's $75 million or $70 million worth of work to be considered in the future of these school districts. Those are the 2 points. Here's a third thing that we need to think about as we get to the close of this chapter presentation is another facilities consideration is what is the status of playing fields for the students in the district. And this is a listing of sports that are currently offered with some sharing arrangements that, by the way, are going to change, but with some sharing arrangements, the number of sports that are currently offered. This came from the chapter last time on program. Again, big picture is you need space for athletic fields. Athletics are a big part of any school program. We can't forget about that either. And as we did an assessment of the 2 athletic complexes, this is kind of what we came up with. You know, we've got gyms, we've got secondary gyms, we have baseball. Someone reminded me, and you're absolutely right, there should be an X under Livingston Manor for a football field. I'll fix that. I missed that. Take care of it. So you can see how these things compare one district to another in terms of athletic facilities. Track, although it's not regulation, here in Livingston Manor. Fields located on campus. They are in Livingston Manor, they're not in Roscoe. Locker room access to the fields, much better in Livingston Manor. And we've got the flooding issue that you know about better than I do with the athletic fields in Roscoe. So again, probably some pluses and minuses, but again, the whole athletic field is a question that we can't forget about as we start talking about facilities. So let's start putting some of these pieces together then. Going through the current program in both districts, this table talks about how many full-size classrooms we will need if the districts decide to merge. Okay, so you can see we've got 17 common branch elementary classrooms. That's kind of K through 6. We currently have 21 in the 2 districts. But when you bring the 2 populations together, instead of having a class of 10 and a class of 9, you can have 1 class of 19. And so there are some of those efficiencies. So the new district, if it's merged, could have 17 elementary classrooms instead of 21. English classes, social studies, math, you get the idea. Special education, again, I don't need to read these to you. You can get an idea. The bottom line is right here. This analysis says if the 2 districts merge, we need to figure out a way to turn this laser. We need about 65 classrooms. Now, again, you can look at this table and say, you know, I think we only need about 62. Somebody else would say, well, you forgot about this, that, or the other. We really need 67. Again, that's not the purpose. The purpose is to say we need about 65. It's not 50. It's not 80. It's about 65 classrooms. Somebody might look at this table and say, you know, you got a couple of rooms in there for computer labs. We have all of our computers on carts. We don't need computer labs anymore. Okay. Somebody else may say, you know, if we merge, we'll be able to take couple of classes, special ed classes back from BOCES. Maybe we need 2 more special ed classes. Those, that is that step between me sitting at my desk in Syracuse, analyzing floor plans as best I can,
to somebody saying, okay, now I got to make this work. It's going to be a little different than this. It's going to be off a room here, off a room there. That's going to happen. But again, the important thing is we're looking at needing about 65 classes. If the school classrooms, full-size classrooms, about 65, if the districts merge. How many classrooms does Livingston Manor have full-size? 43. How many classrooms does Roscoe have? 32. There's the answer to the first question. Can we fit all the kids in one building? Can we? No way. No way. Can't do it. Not even close. We've got 75 classrooms currently. The new building will, if you merge, there'd be about 65 classrooms needed. And the existing rooms have 43 and 32 classrooms in them. So that is the answer to question number one. Pretty straightforward. So that's one piece. That's that whole piece about how many classrooms are there? What are you going to do with classrooms? How many classrooms you're going to need? That's the first A section that we cemented. Second thing that we cemented was that at some point in the future, these school districts are going to have to look at about $70 million worth of work to be done. Okay. The state knows that it's very expensive to build and remodel and renovate schools. They know it's expensive. They also know that you can't do it with just the local tax base. So the state will assist you and any other school district in New York State by paying for part of your building projects, and to make it kind of simple. In Livingston Manor, the state pays about 69% of the bill of buildings that are built in Livingston Manor. In Roscoe, the state pays about 52%, and the taxpayers pay the other 48%. Okay, so those are the percentages that the state will pay for any building that you do. Now, having said that, I'm going to tell you now, that's not really the way it works. The other kicker in here, and you'll see it when we write the report, is the state will reimburse you at this rate for expenses that they approve. Which means you may say, well, we want to put an addition on and put in 3 gyms and 2 swimming pools. And the state may say, you can go ahead and do that, but we're not going to approve that. So if you want to do that, you do that on your own dime. So understand that it's not quite as simple as I'm making it, because this notion of what the state will approve is part of this calculation. It's a very important part of the calculation, but it's down the road. So where we are right now is the state pays Livingston Manor 69%, and the Livingston Manor taxpayers pay 31%. State pays 52% in Roscoe. Taxpayers pay 48%. We said that there are some incentives to school districts who merge. 2 school districts that merge, the state realizes that there's probably going to be the most opportune time to improve facilities. So the state says, if you merge school districts, we'll take the higher of these 2 percentages and we'll increase that percentage by 30%. And that's how much of a share we will pay, but only if you merge. If you don't merge, you're going to get 69% and 52%. But if you merge, you take the larger of the 2 reimbursement rates, 68.8%. and you take 30% of that. You don't add 30 onto it, you take 30% of this number, which is 20.6, and add the 68.8 plus the 20.6, that's the higher of the two. And what we find is that if you merge, the state will pay 89% of that $70 million, not 52%, not 69%. So that's clearly an advantage to merging. The state picks up a much larger share of the cost of improving your buildings.
But that would be Livingston Manor would get the larger break than Roscoe.
No, it's all one school district at that point. All one school district. Yeah, it all comes together, gets all recalculated. But it's all one school district. So they're going to reimburse 89% of whatever the merged district does. Okay. So we've got this idea that we need 65 full-size classrooms to handle the kids and the courses we want to offer. We've got this notion that we're going to have $70 million worth of work to do in the future, that if we merge, the state will pay a larger percentage than if we don't merge. Again, right, wrong, or indifferent, those are the rules. So that's the way it is. That's clearly the state provides this incentive for school districts to merge. This is pretty attractive. Everybody, it's no secret. And they do that because they'd like to provide incentives for districts to merge. So, again, you put all of those things together, and here are our recommendations on facilities, and hopefully this kind of flows from the conversation. First of all, neither building is capable of housing all the students if the districts merge. So Manor's got 43, Roscoe's got 32 classrooms. We need 65. That's what that bullet is. Neither district has enough, is big enough on its own. Secondary schools require more space than elementary. Talking about more specials, home and career skills classes, science labs, more art rooms, all that kind of stuff that goes with the specials, youth rooms, band, of course, they take up more space than elementary does. Livingston Manor's got 43 rooms and 100,000 square feet. And it's larger than Roscoe, which has 32 classrooms and 68,000 square feet. And there are a number of advantages to the athletic fields in Livingston Manor from that table we did on athletics. So as a result, here's our recommendation. That the pre-K through 6 elementary school be located in the current Roscoe buildings, and the 7-12 secondary school be located in the current Livingston Manor building. Those are our recommendations. Again, nothing earth-shattering. If you hopefully understand the foundation of the first 25 minutes of my talking, why we get to this recommendation. It's not something that we just thought one building over another. There are very specific reasons for why we come up with this recommendation, whether it be the athletic fields, whether it be the number of full-size classrooms or whatever. Frankly, we didn't see a lot of other options. So here's the food for thought question. Kind of wrap up discussion. Do you understand what we're talking about? Does what we're talking about make sense? What is unclear? And what do you have questions about? And is there another alternative that we did not consider that we should have discovered and done some more research on? So let me just take a breath, get a sip of water as you think for a minute. We understand this is a big piece of this study of where kids are going to go to school. It's a big piece of the study. So it's certainly not as complex as merger studies that with 2 school districts that have 3 or 4 elementary schools each, that have 1 or 2 middle schools, that have 2 or 3 high schools. It's not like that. It's pretty straightforward. You've got 2 buildings in 2 districts. And yet, you know, we don't want to go too fast either. We want to make sure that you understand that you have the opportunity to ask questions and comments. So let me get a drink, look at your notes, look at the presentation, think about it, and then come back in half a minute, and hopefully we'll provide some opportunity for questions or comments. How's that? Okay. I have an eye appointment on Thursday in my eyes. That's why I walk back. Okay, committee, what say you? What questions, comments, or thoughts? Or other options? What are we missing? Yes.
I do have questions. I've had people that talk to me, so I do have a question here. And I'm trying to get to them. Okay, what is the max amount of students that Livingston Manor?
The maximum number of students at Livingston American House. I don't have the answer to that. The question was, what's the maximum number of students that Livingston Manor can house? I mean, the reason it's a complicated question is it depends how old those students are, what kind of classes they're in. Are they special ed students? Are they elementary? Are they secondary? Could we add another 30 students in and spread them across the 6 elementary grades? It may seem like an easy question. It's a very complex question. Okay.
Enrollment continues to decline, or Roscoe closed and Livingston Manor be the primary school for all students in both districts.
Well, again, looking at our projected numbers, if Roscoe were to close and Livingston Manor were to remain the only school, that's your question, we would have to somehow free up at least 22 classrooms in what we're projecting for that to happen.
So that's how many students would that be that you would have to, less students would you say?
Same question. It depends who those students are. And I don't want to not answer the question, but it depends.
It's a hard, like, I would say it's a hard, each school district right now would easily handle a couple hundred more students space-wise, if they're spaced out over the, because our average class sizes based on the last meeting are around 21-ish, 22-ish. Well, the average class size is 17,
Smaller,
but
right.
they could conceivably accommodate 21, 22. If, you know, 150 kids were spread out over pre-K through 12 at Roscoe, they could easily absorb that without having to add any staff or do anything different. Same thing at Livingston Manor, because the class sizes are relatively small, 100 kids came in at pre-K. You know, neither one can handle that. You'd have to
Right.
change a lot of what we're doing. You know, I think kind of what Lily's question, you know, it's framed around, you know, the potential of a building closure. And could, you know, declining enrollments, everybody eventually fit in one. And it kind of goes back to what we talked about, you know, program and enrollment at the last meeting. The way we do school is very different than it was done 20 or 30 years ago. You know, when we walked around both buildings and tours, you know, we saw how classrooms are set up now, as opposed to the way they were 30 years ago, where it was, you know, 30 desks and rows. You know, we went into classrooms that have, you know, 15 kids in them, and there's really no space. So things are done very differently in education than they were, a number of years ago. So I think the could things close? Probably yes. 20, 30 years from now, there's no guarantees in anything. Whether we merge or don't merge, things are gonna change over time. But, based on kind of what the enrollment, the projections, the staffing, the facility stuff, and, kind of what they've talked about so far, it seems unlikely in the immediate future.
Absolutely. More beyond unlikely. Can't imagine. But again, understand, we're not avoiding the question, but it's a complex question. Could we add, let me make this come out right, 52 kids to either school? Well, if the 52 kids came 4 at each grade level, 4 at K, 4 at 1, 4 at 2, 4 at 3, we probably could. We could add 4 to a class. But if those 52 kids all came in K through 4, then you got a different structure. So it's hard to answer that question fairly.
What if you structured so that the elementary kids stay their buildings? The elementary kids stay in Rossville, and the elementary kids stay with the and deal with high school students in some manner. It would be a busing thing would even be a better scenario. You'd probably feel more comfortable if you didn't take the younger students and transport them from one place to the other.
All right, so you're saying,
I'm just asking that question, but, deal with that and that.
okay,
Or you leave the elementary kids in their own district.
right. So you're saying, if I understand it, as another option, have Roscoe be pre-K through 6 for current Roscoe kids and have Livingston Manor be pre-K through 12 for both, for the pre-K through 6 for Livingston Manor kids and 7 through 12 for Livingston Manor and Roscoe both. That's what you're suggesting. Okay, that would leave the elementary kids in their current schools. Yeah, I understand it. Okay, and we have not looked at that. So I asked for other options. That's another option. We can take a look at that. Got it. Got it.
And the elementary kids, and I think the busing situation, maybe be the better scenario.
Got it. Got it. I don't have the answer to that tonight, but we'll take a look at it. Okay? Sure.
Okay, if Roscoe Central School was to close, who owns the school and who has the right to sell it?
If there's a merger, all of the property that currently exists in both school districts becomes under the ownership of the merged school district. So if Roscoe and Livingston Manor merge, everything that Roscoe has and everything that Livingston Manor has now becomes owned by Route 17 Central, whatever you call the new district. They own everything from both districts. You understand that?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it would be the board that would make the decision about selling.
Yeah, and the board at that point, they're just more assets that the board of the merged school district has. And they would decide, like anything else, what they would do with property, like they would with program, like they would with sports, like they would with, like anything. It would be the board, right, of the merged district. Yes.
You can highlight it this way. The current building aid ratios of Roscoe are roughly 50%. Is it fair to say that the tax equalization between the two existing districts? It seems that the residents of the Roscoe district would have more reasons for case incentives for capital projects. So the merged district would also definitely benefit that Roscoe has more to gain than Livingston Manor.
Essentially, this slide says that if you merge, the state will pay 20% more than Livingston Manor would currently get, and they would pay approximately 37% more than Roscoe would currently get. That's what you're asking. I would agree with you. Yes. They both benefit. Roscoe's percentage increase in terms of help from the state would be greater than Livingston Manor, yes.
So remaining in Canyon, as a Roscoe resident, will face potentially more tax burden for capital projects as an independent. Certainly.
That's correct, that's clear,
Compared to others.
that's clear. Yes,
Where would one find where New York State outlines the limitations when it comes to what they pay for and what they don't? And here's an example. When Sullivan West built their original school district over in Lake Huntington, it wasn't until later into the process the taxpayers found out that there were certain ticket items that the state took right off the table and would not allow them to pay for with that money. I guess it came down to they would need to pay for anything that wasn't considered contents of the classroom or technology in the classroom. So one of the ticket items on this list for Livingston Manor says $2.5 million when it comes to building interior updates. So the question is there's a whole list of what needs to be done, but where would we find what New York State will pay for and what they won't,
Right.
which will put that all on taxpayers?
right, exactly. Well, first point, if the state is not gonna pay for it, they're not gonna pay for it if you merge, and they're not gonna pay for it if you don't merge. So either way, if it's not an allowable expense, they're not gonna pay for it. There is an incredibly complex formula that I don't think anybody in the state, well, I don't understand it. It's called the maximum cost allowance. If you want to look it up, that's what you can Google in New York State building projects. And that is given the number of students you have and the numbers of rooms you have. And elementary kids get weighted differently than secondary kids, and special ed kids get weighted differently than, and it goes on and on and on and on. And it's, you know, you've got this room, if you put a divider down the middle of the room, can you count it as 2 rooms? There are an incredibly complex formula for how that comes together. And I would suggest, maybe John, maybe you know, the architect that you have will meet with the state education department and will represent your interests and get that cost, that maximum cost allowance as high as possible. I cannot give you the formula. It is pages and pages.
So I can add to that. So exactly like Alan's talking about, what's aidable and what isn't is something we are now. And I have already spent a significant amount of time in both districts talking with state ed about this exact question. So for example, at Livingston Manor, you know, the wall and the bridge out front needs some work. However, that doesn't directly impact students. So it isn't aidable as a standalone project. So that's one of the things that we've been struggling with at Livingston Manor is how do we address that issue and it be aidable, you know, with state aid. And one way that's possible is if you do a project large enough where the incidental costs, so whenever you do a capital project, there's they call it incidental. Those are other things associated with the project that become aidable to a certain extent. So your maximum cost allowance is broken up by 2 parts, the program piece and then the incidental piece. And how your building is utilized impacts your maximum cost allowance. So the questions that I presented to state ed, which were, you know, one of the gentlemen that was down here at our first meeting, and then those folks at facilities planning is, you know, in the event of a merger, what does that new maximum cost allowance look like? Because while there's $70 million worth of work, the combined maximum cost allowance is not $70 million. So anything that we did or the merged district would do, or the independence districts do, that's above that maximum cost allowance doesn't get aid. So there's 2 districts upstate recently merged. That new merged district wants to build a new school. Their maximum cost allowance isn't high enough to cover the cost of building that new school. So they're going through the process with state ed to try and figure out how to address that. But, you know, so it's a complex process of working with the architects, working with the financial advisors, and working closely with state ed. So any project that's done, whether the districts merge or not, maximizes the aid that, you know, we can get. We've been doing it that way as independent districts. And if the districts were to merge, that would be that same process. So, you know, just because there's $70 million worth of work between the two districts that need to be done, you know, if you look at that, I think one of the things on the Roscoe side is improvements to the athletic fields. If this building were to become the middle high school, those things may not need to be done. So that $7 million may drop. And it's picking and choosing what is educationally appropriate, what is mission critical. Both buildings, boilers, heating systems, electrical systems, all of those things are kind of your non-negotiables that you need to do either way. Those tend to be heavily aided. You know, it's that other stuff, parking lots, outside site work, those things that become incidentals of things that don't get aided as much. Or in some cases, a turf field. You know, sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. It's working closely with state ed to make sure that the projects that are built maximize that aid piece and aren't just things that people want, that, you know, they have to be purposely added into projects and staged into projects so that the maximum cost allowance doesn't get exceeded, because stuff beyond that, you know, doesn't become aidable. You know, if we can only do a $30 million project, right, and that maximum cost allowance changes every year. So it's a 5-year cycle, correct me if I'm misspeaking, but it's a 5-year cycle, and as older projects drop off, that money goes back into the allowable maximum cost allowance to be used again. So even if the districts merge, we're starting with what our current maximum cost allowances are. Also, what was explained to me by state ed, because as the superintendent of both buildings, there's projects that need to be done whether we merge or not. So I'm currently planning and having conversations with the architects and the engineers and the fiscal planners on projects if we merge and projects if we don't merge. And that maximum cost allowance part that Alan talked about changes based on how the buildings are used. So this physical building's maximum cost allowance will change if it becomes a 712 building, because it goes by what your classroom space is and how those individual spaces are used, your cafeteria space, all that kind of stuff. So if the merger is approved and does go through, both buildings will get a new maximum cost. The maximum cost allowance is building based, and it's combined at the district level. You know, so that the amount of work that needs to be done isn't going to change, but how it's aided is going to change based on how the buildings are utilized.
I
It's
think you can,
confusing is an understatement.
right, you can get the concept. Good luck with the details. I mean, all,
Yeah, I think the issue is just that, when it comes to voting yes or no,
right,
taxpayers, it breeds a bit of mistrust, and that you might be being sold a bed of goods that, you know, well, this will all get paid for through the state, when only this, and this can,
Right.
and this really can't.
I'm very careful when I present this to say, this is what these numbers mean, and then I say, but it's not that easy. It's not that, I always do that. I pretty much got that memorized. It's my, right, it's not. But to John's point, if $60 million of the 70 million is aidable, they're gonna pay 8 on 60 million whether you merge or you don't merge. So it's gonna be the same. And those numbers change. Bring back 2 special education classes from BOCES. Your cost allowance will go up. You have more kids, and special ed kids carry a weighting. So that can change it. It's figuring your the maximum amount the state will aid is probably a process that will take 6 months,
Yeah, and that was one of my other questions,
right?
is if a merger goes through, how soon could the new district put out a project to voters? And the folks at State Ed response was, well, we don't know, because we have to figure out how the buildings are gonna be utilized and determine the new maximum cost allowances before we could even submit a project to State Ed to determine whether it would be approved and what would be able and what wouldn't. The formula for what's aidable doesn't change. Those are things we already know. Every time we do a project, there's parts of it that are aided differently than others. And, you know, the key is looking at everything that needs to be done and purposefully staging the projects so that we maximize the maximum amount of aid that you can get, you know, because anything we do, you know, even right now, it's 68% and 52%. You know, we want to get the state to pay for as much of that as possible, as opposed to our local taxpayers. The same holds true if the districts merge, is, you know, timing those things that need to be done in a way that the aid is maximized.
My only comment would be that if people say, well, the only way I trust these people from Syracuse is if they tell me of the 70 million, 66,250,000 is what's aidable, and they didn't give us that number. I hope that people don't walk away with that. It is complex. Have your architect in some night to do a presentation. The architect won't be able to tell you because they have to get the state to approve it. It's a complex process that is rooted in the state does have limits on what they will pay aid on. The aid increases if you merge, and the numbers that go into determining your particular formula can change. So nobody could walk through that door right now and say, here's your number of the 70 million. You can't do it. Your architect will negotiate with the state for, like I said, 6 months, trying to get that number as high as possible.
Yeah,
But nobody knows what that number is. It's not that we don't want to answer it. We are very clear that it's not as simple as multiply 89% times 70 million. It's not that. There are going to be some things that are not approved. We're very clear about that. But that doesn't mean we or anybody else can give you that number tonight.
but I was going to say, I think the most critical thing is what John's already been doing and talking about, is to be proactive in reaching out to the state education department and getting all of the right people in that room, the architects, the financial planners, the school district, you know, all of those people, and with State Ed, and having those conversations. And that way, nobody is surprised down the road, whether it's taxpayers expecting to have more than they end up with, or, you know, however that plays out. But those lines of communication, and not let the project development get too far ahead of itself before you have a clear understanding of where the aid situation stands.
Well, I think one of the things, I guess, we have as a benefit is that in our area, a multi-district merger has occurred in the last 25 years. And, you know, being local and having witnessed that, and, you know, knowing people in all of those different districts, that what they liked, what they didn't like. I mean, this process itself is purposely very different than what occurred at Sullivan West. Because, you know, the discussion of everything was done in secret. Nobody knew what was going on. And we have tried, you know, it was a very conscious decision by both boards to make this process as public and as transparent as possible, and to address, you know, as many concerns as people will bring to us. You know, like Alan said, we're not going to have, or they're not going to have the answers to everything, but knowing that, you know, a new building was built and a lot of people were pissed at what was aided, what didn't get aided, and whose taxes did what, you know, trying to at least address an understanding of those concerns and being aware of what resulted in those outcomes on the Sullivan West side, you know, are things that we're purposely trying to make sure we have, it may not have the answers to, but at least an understanding of why those things occur.
So I just want to make sure that I understand. So Livingston Manor is a larger building, needs more work done than Roscoe. Cost-wise, because it's just a bigger space to keep up. But secondary ed gets weighted higher than elementary ed. Okay, so it kind of
And
works.
half-day kindergarten is weighted even less. You have full day in both places?
Yeah.
Yeah, full
Yeah,
day
full day.
in both places.
Okay, so
Um,
that kind of works in our favor, that this is a better site for the middle high school anyway, because then the aid here would be more than.
Theoretically, yes.
Yeah.
That unknown of what the new maximum cost allowance is, and that's a number, because I asked it, well, could we project that? No, absolutely not. They don't do any work unless, you know, there's a vote that says, yes, a new district is gonna be formed. They will not entertain an exercise that would answer those questions for us. I tried.
Good luck with facilities planning. I just wonder. Hard.
So, if it's gonna be a high school, so if we, say community work or any classroom, so it's like a usable high school facility, is that included in this or no? Because like it'd be interesting to see like an approximate cost. That's.
Those are current as buildings.
So that's a great question, Julie, because that was another question that I asked, is if the use of the buildings changes, how does, you know, our building condition surveys, I think in one of the slides that Alan showed, they were done every 5 years. So they had changed that because every 5 years, every school district in New York State had to do one. And SED was overwhelmed, and it was a ridiculous process that wasn't as beneficial as it could be. So now they've created this stage thing where every year somebody's BCS is due. Roscoe's and Manors haven't fallen into that new 5-year thing yet. So in the event of a merge, a new building condition surveys need to be done on how these buildings will be utilized. So that $70 million worth of stuff is going to change a little bit. Some of the stuff won't. You know, some of the big numbers on the Manor side are heating systems. You know, we've done boilers, we've done controls, but everything that's in between is old. The ventilation systems up in the attic, the electrical systems, the cafeteria. You know, those are things that in the Manor building need to be addressed no matter what, merger or not. On the Roscoe side, a complete heating system replacement has occurred. A complete roof replacement has occurred. So there's been infrastructure things done on the Roscoe side that haven't been done on the Manor side. So some of the reasons those numbers are different is because different things have occurred over the years. If you were on the tour, we talked about the hailstorm that we had a few years ago, did a lot of damage to the school building. So a lot of our slate being replaced and the copper being replaced, some things that were slated to be capital projects got done under insurance because of a natural disaster that occurred for us. But some of those things, merger or not, still have to be done.
So would it be fair to say, getting back to what Mr. King said, even though Roscoe will be benefiting from a higher percentage increase in our state aid, a lot of the projects that aren't approved, like you just said, are the first two on here, like the site rating manuals, that would directly benefit Livingston Manor students solely, as no Roscoe student would need the bridge to cross into town, things like that. And even though we'd be getting a higher percentage of the district, the burden of nearly $11 million, which is more than half of what you have for Roscoe Slate, would then be placed on Roscoe taxpayers. Correct? Am I understanding that correctly?
it would be placed on the new district,
which would include Boston Tech.
which, you know, includes tax from both districts.
Okay.
Anything else? Who's excited to hear about transportation? Here's none.
Good evening, everyone. This section, we're going to talk a little bit about the transportation and what the transportation in the merged district might look like. As Alan said not too long ago, there's pluses and minuses to every merger discussion in every group of districts that entertain that discussion. And quite often, transportation falls in that minus side. So we go into it knowing that, but there's also a few times where there are opportunities to make it a plus. But let's start with taking a look at what we know about the two districts, where they stand today. They're very similar, as you can see from the slide. Both districts have contract transportation. In fact, use the same contractors. I'm sure the majority of you are well aware. Rolling B serves both districts. And on that note, I want to give a little shout out to Fred and Nick with Rolling B, because they had to put up with me with several emails and some phone conversations, and they were extremely helpful to me as I tried to sort through all of the data that were provided to us. We had, you know, I actually had the bus list for every group in both of the districts by kid by kid, and to try to pull all of this information together as accurately as possible. So I think I'm going to talk about both districts in one lump here because they are similar. There is a single tier bus system for students. What that means is that all of the students, regardless of grade, come to the district in one trip, on one loop every morning, and they all go home regardless of age or grade in the afternoon. The districts do not own any buses. The districts themselves do not have transportation personnel. The contractor is responsible for both of those things. In Livingston Manor, there is no bus garage owned by the district. As John pointed out on the tour, there is a small facility that is not on the district property, that's adjacent, I believe, right? Yeah, and that is something that Rolling B owns and maintains, perhaps leases, I'm not sure, but it's Rolling B's operation there. It's not something that the district has. Where in Roscoe, there is something that on all of the state websites, they call it a bus garage, but it really is just a small facility. It's not used for bus repairs. It really is used primarily just for storage or a landing space for the drivers in that district, just to exchange paperwork and that kind of thing. But it really does not serve as a true bus garage where repairs would be done. And the last thing, this is as the snapshot of the bus routes that I mentioned earlier, the lists, counting each of the students that is transported. So this is different than the total enrollment. But each of the students that appeared on that list in Livingston Manor, at that point in time that they ran those lists, there were 222 kids. In Roscoe, there were 166 children that were being transported. So this is a slide that we always do and we always talk about in the merger studies. It's a little less relevant here because the district does not own its fleet, the contractor does. So, you know, in a district where they own their fleet, that sometimes the merger has ramifications of causing the district to need to purchase more vehicles. Just simply not an issue here, but I share it because in being consistent with other studies that we've done. So these are the vehicles that Rolling Bee uses for Livingston Manor transportation. And I think you'll see on here that there are 6 small capacity vehicles, you know, 20 and less, and 4 full-size 66 passenger vehicles. They do use, in both districts actually, they use a lot of the smaller vehicles, due partly to the geography, the terrain, and the coupling with that with sensitivity toward the time on the bus. So they have a lot of small vehicles that they use to go out, pick up the kids, bring them back in, and repeat the process in the afternoon. Next slide is, this is still staying with Livingston Manor. This is the part where the folks in the superintendent's office, the ladies in the superintendent's offices, and the Rolling Bee folks got sick of me. So this is a route summary, and just to walk you through these columns, because this slide gets a little bit messy. So those of you in the audience that have the 3 slides per page, this is probably going to be a challenge, but hopefully the committee members can have the full slide here and make it a little bit easier to see. So this is Livingston Manor. This is the route number or name. So one of the things you can tell in this column is that there are 8 in-district, what we'll call in-district routes, and then there are, let's see, these 1, 2, 3 that are out of district. So children are transported out of district for a variety of reasons. Might be the best special needs placement for some child. It might be students that are taking career and technical education courses at BOCES. Could be a variety of reasons, but those top 3 routes are going outside of the district boundaries. The state education department recommends that bus routes do not exceed 60 minutes. That's their target. Now there are very few districts that I've worked with where every single route, every single day is less than 60 minutes. And what you'll see here in Livingston Manor is well, I'm getting ahead of myself. So this second column is the first student pickup. The very first kid gets on the bus at that time. And then when the morning run ends, when they get to school and they unload. So the reason that's important, because that's the kid, these kids here that are getting on at these times, those are the kids that are on the bus for the longest amount of time, which is what this 4th column shares. So it's the longest riding time. So only that first child that gets on the bus has that long riding time. Everybody else is getting on after that. And so this is the worst case scenario, if you will, as far as time on bus. Right here. Then moving on, the PM run starts at this time. So this is dismissal. And when they're headed out to the buses, and then, you know, conversely, similar to concept, this is the last student is dropped off at this time here. And doing the math, this is the riding time for this particular child or family that gets off last. And this is the riding time. This column indicates the number of passengers that are on that particular route. Again, at the time we took the snapshot of the list of pupils that are on the route, right here. And then lastly, this is really, I think, a matter of information. This is the student miles covered. These are the miles that the buses run daily in each one of these routes. The most relevant piece of information, I think, for this discussion and what community members are most concerned with is riding time on bus. So it's probably this town here in the morning, this town here in the afternoon. And if you take the time to go down through and look at those numbers, you'll see that in the case of Livingston Manor, 5 of the 8 in-district routes currently are longer than 60 minutes at either the AM or the PM, and I think, no, it's either AM or PM. There's no case where it's both. And I think it's also important to note that this is the quote average. There are days where, this is assuming every kid rides. There are many days where not every child will ride, so it's going to be less. There are days where the weather conditions may not be great, it's going to be longer. But this is just to give you an idea that there are a number of runs that are right around, you know, a couple minutes less, a couple minutes more, that 1 hour mark in district. Okay, questions on that table and what it's showing you there? This will do the same thing for Roscoe. Okay. On this next slide, we just talked about there's 8 in-district routes. 5 of the 8 currently have riding times longer than 60 minutes. And I just provided for you there in a kind of a summary, the list of out-of-district locations that the buses are currently transporting to. And this is something that is very likely changing year to year. You might have a student that's, you know, one student that's going to one of these places, that student moves or the placement changes. So that's kind of a moving target that's assessed every year based on where the students are assigned. So taking the same look at Roscoe's transportation, very similar to what you saw for Livingston Manor as far as the vehicles that are being used. You've got, in this case, 7 of those smaller capacity vehicles, again, owned by Rolling V. These are not district vehicles. And then 4 of the full size, either 56 or 66 passenger buses. So here's this table with a lot of numbers for Roscoe that we just looked at for Livingston Manor. The columns are the same. Column titles are the same. So now you know what you're looking at. You've got these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 out of district routes. Roscoe has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in district routes. Only one of these, as you look at these longest riding times AM, longest riding time PM, there's only one of these routes, Route C, in the afternoon that is more than 60 minutes. And that is the one here at 70. And again, I went back to Fred and to Marlon, asked them to verify these numbers, and they adjusted a few, but these are as accurate as we can get them for you at this point. So to summarize Roscoe, a little bit. You got 7 in-district routes. Only one of them right now exceeds the 60-minute recommendation, and that's only in the afternoon. And there are 5 bullets there that show the out-of-district locations. So what do we have to think about if we were to talk about a merger? You know where things stand today based on what we just looked at. So the merger considerations for transportation, things that we've been asked repeatedly when we've done these studies. So if you just heard Alan talk about the recommendation to use 2 buildings for a merged district. So what's the distance between the 2 buildings? You all know it better than I, but the distance is roughly 7 miles. Okay, so what system might we use to deal with this? And you know, Alan makes an interesting suggestion as far as something for us to look at. This Alan, not Alan. This analysis is based on Alan Cole's recommendation of pre-K through 6 in Roscoe, the Roscoe building, and 7 through 12 in the Livingston Manor building. Should we look at another configuration, this would need to be reworked to consider that as well. So what model are we going to use to transport children in a merged district? Are we going to continue with our single tier model? All the kids come in on one route? Or might we consider a two-tier model, which perhaps some of you have been in a district when you were in school yourselves, where the high school kids came at one time, the buses dropped them, they went back out and gathered up the elementary children for some iteration of that. But the point being that they're running the routes twice. They're making 2 loops on each route in the morning, 2 loops on each route in the afternoon, first delivering the middle school, high school kids, and then the elementary or vice versa. So that's a model to be considered. What I will say about that is, in talking to the Rolling V folks, that's not something that is much more detailed than, I guess, similar to the conversation about state ed creating a new maximum cost allowance. That involves a whole lot of analysis and time and a lot of factors that we just don't know right now. So to try to develop that in a hypothetical situation for a merged district, Rolling V did not feel that's something they had the capacity to do at this time. So while I want to say that that's an option that exists, that's not one that we've looked at as we go further down this road. So the other way to get children between buildings is to keep doing what you're doing, basically. Run the routes out of the Roscoe facility, just as they are today, essentially. Run the routes out of the Livingston Manor facility, and then shuttle, bring them in to the current facility, the current building, as is done now, and then use a shuttle system to move the kids from, in this, let's say, to move the Livingston Manor elementary children to the Roscoe building, and the Roscoe middle school, high school children to the Livingston Manor building. So that is what we've used here now. That creates.
Well, I stop you just one second. The one-tier system works. If you run the same system, the transportation, running now, bringing the students into the buildings, even the elementary school kids in each district, then all you have to do is shuttle high school kids, however you want to shuttle.
Right.
No, I don't.
I mean, that really goes back to what you just mentioned earlier, correct? Yeah, and that's exactly what I mean when I said, this is not your suggestion. That would create a different look. So I would need to go back and look at that differently, but you're absolutely right. That would mean fewer shuttles and fewer transition of children, because that's one thing that I've heard when we've done other merger studies that's of concern, particularly at elementary age children, is one more transition off of one bus onto perhaps a different bus. Maybe not, maybe they use their same bus if they get lucky. But it's a transition from one bus to a different bus to shuttle over. So, you know, it would kind of cut that in half, we'll call it, for lack of specifics at this point. But I think, so let me go back there. So that, regroup my thoughts here. So there is that consternation that exists as far as the shuttling goes, is that transitioning of kids between vehicles. Another thing that is of concern at times is the last bullet on here is, okay, so what do we do with the other kids? You know, let's take those elementary children. They're all in at Roscoe. The current Roscoe elementary kids are there. And now the high school kids are headed over to Livingston Manor. In the meantime, Livingston Manor Elementary are headed to Roscoe. But you still got the Roscoe elementary kids sitting there. And what are you going to do about it? That's a challenge. I don't have an answer for you, but that's something that districts would need to figure out, and to be perfectly transparent, you know, we'll share that information here. I will also say that there's, you know, a number of districts that have figured out. You know, there are things that they do for that 10 or 15 minutes, which goes to the second bullet here. Is this going to require additional time on buses? The answer, of course, is yes, for some kids. Not for every single kid, but for some kids it will. For any of the kids that have to take the shuttle, it's going to be additional time on buses. Depending on the route that the shuttle takes between the two buildings, you know, it's possible that the kids, if they use Old Route 17, it's possible that some of those kids may in fact have less riding time. But that's a, you know, a fairly small segment, I think, of your overall population, but it is possible that those kids might have less riding time. So, I want to make sure I hit all the bullets because I've kind of gone all over the place with this a little bit, but, yeah, so, and lastly, I guess, is, the last item here is that, to explore modifications to the current bus routes. And again, we didn't get into that, at this level, at this point in the discussion. So it's perhaps more than, you know, if you're shuttling and you're using Old Route 17, and maybe there's some more kids that could, that can fine tune those routes. And that's the nice part, I guess, too, about, from my experience of working with people transportation when I was working in districts and all of that, that when you work with a contractor, that's what these folks do all day, every day, and they have a lot of experience with a variety of models. So they would be a big resource in helping to at least brainstorm ideas on what would be the most effective and efficient way to do that. But it is likely that there would be more time on buses for some of those kids, depending on their grade level and where they're coming in from. So if you're going to start to shuttle or use that shuttle system, there's also going to be some additional costs to do that. We've tried to provide a realistic picture of this. So here's what we came up with. I came up with it. So to get the kids from the Livingston Manor grades PK to 6 to Roscoe, based on the numbers that you're currently transporting, and Livingston Manor is currently transporting in grades PK through 6, it would take, I believe, 3 buses, 3 of the full-size buses to shuttle those kids to Roscoe. Nick gave me an estimated annual cost, which he felt was a conservative number of $40,000 per year per shuttle. So this line here is reflecting that $40,000 per year and 3 shuttles for $120,000 additional cost per year. So similarly to construction costs, capital project costs, the state also will aid transportation costs, approved transportation costs at a particular ratio that is specific to the district. So your current aid rate, transportation aid ratios for Livingston Manor is 0.607. That's the share that the state pays. For Roscoe is 0.487. So listen, you all created a new situation for me, because it's typically the districts that we worked with, or I've worked with on emergent studies, those transportation aid ratios are much closer to, you know, a few thousandths off, you know. Here it's not that way. So what I did was calculated a weighted average using the population, the wealth values and so on of the district that would be pieces of the transportation aid calculation. And I came up with a weighted average of the state paying 56% of eligible transportation costs. So using that, what I said, the out-of-pocket for the new merged district is going to be 44%, because the other 56 would be 44%.
I don't want to throw a thing, you know, my elbow hit something it shouldn't have. Get the full, I don't know, there's a little button. Thank you. That's very strange. I'm sorry about that. So you all have the printed copies in front of you, right? So I'm just going to persevere here. I hope I didn't mess it up too badly. Thank you. Turn it to get anything. So applying that 44% to the additional $120,000 for this shuttle, the PK to 6 shuttle, would be 52,000, an additional cost to the new district of $52,800. You follow the math with me on that? Are you good with that? No? Yes? Maybe? Okay. Same thing, going the other way around. To get the Roscoe grade 7 through 12 kids over to Winston Manor on the shuttle, would likely only need 2. Same math. 40,000 times 2, $80,000. Take the local cost of 44% applied to the $80,000. Yields a number of 35,200. So if we take 52.8 here, 35.2 here, and so the total estimated local cost for the new district to provide the shuttles as presented here is $88,000. So the reason that I go through this exercise is you'll see that next month, when we come back at the end of this month, in the financial analysis, it will show potential savings, it will show potential additional revenue, it will show additional cost in a merged district for certain things, perhaps lost revenue in some areas. So this is built into that because as we've said from the get-go, we try to give you a realistic, conservative estimate of the pluses and minuses of the merger conversation, including the financial pluses and minuses. And that's all consolidated in one big table that you'll see in a few weeks. And I think that table really gets to the heart of the financial picture. So that's why it's important to develop this here and that it can be included in that cost analysis. So, so the other merger considerations might be, are there opportunities for efficiencies? And we were just talking a little bit earlier, your 2 districts are already doing a whole lot of sharing. And you're already working together in a lot of ways. And there is some of that happening already in transportation, as I understand it. But are there opportunities even beyond that? So right now, Roscoe may be taking a group of kids to a BOCES site. And Livingston Manor may be taking obviously a different group of kids to the BOCES site. Now, instead of 2 runs, you would only have 1 in a merged district. And so there will be those opportunities for efficiencies within a merged district. Also, same thing for some of those other out-of-district routes that are going to placements for special needs children. And perhaps the opportunity to redevelop, as I mentioned earlier, some of the existing routes to improve the efficiency. When you look at, places where in a merged district, could you alter the route, which maybe now is Livingston Manor and Roscoe separately, maybe there's an opportunity for some overlapping there. Again, something that the contractor would be able to quickly take a look at and, have some input on that. But I think the key here too is, should the districts choose to merge, that this ongoing evaluation and revision to transportation, it won't be perfect the first year you run it in a merged district. They will have to take a look at it, continue to assess and revise and look for opportunities for increased efficiencies in those routes. So that is really at this point what I can share with you about what I know about transportation and what it might look like in a merged district. I'm very well aware that there are perhaps a whole lot of unanswered questions and things that we can't address at this moment, but I'm going to pause there. And I guess, Alan, I'm going to ask you if we want to do breakout groups. So let me ask the questions first. Questions on what I presented, and then we'll let you all talk as you have at the last meeting, you committee folks. The questions on what information that I shared.
the ride times in this event seem to be based around probably the number of stops, so the total miles covered were smaller, but they had longer ride times. So I did notice in Oscar, that there was one that was 82 miles. Is there a point where there's a rule regulation or where there's a contiguous district that is closer, as an example, students in East Branch who could possibly attend council? Is that an option for parents? Once they're finding the district, or just
Well, right. So when you buy a piece of property and you have there's only one district that property is assigned to. The one exception is in very, very rare cases where a single parcel cuts across a line, but I'm not even gonna go there. But generally speaking, in every other example, your house is in a specific district. And it is where the district boundaries have been drawn. And you can go to that district. Now, I worked in a district, in fact, where we got lucky because there were no kids living there, but if we had, we would have had to go, it's kind of like there's a lake in the middle, and you have to go all the way out around to get to it. You couldn't go what would seem the short way, but those kids would have been in the district I worked in. But the bus from a contiguous district, similar to what you were just describing, I think, was already coming like a half a mile away. But it was, these kids were in my district. They weren't in that bus district. I think there have been situations like that for the sake of, I guess, what do I want to say, for the kids' convenience or whatever, but the two local districts may have gotten together and had a separate arrangement, but generally speaking, the children will go to the district in which they reside.
Just a follow-up question with that. I had a mother ask me this question. So she wanted to know, in living in Delaware County, would they have the option to attend Downsville or the Bird School, which you just answered? But can't they make new lines then? Because if they're only living 15 minutes away from one school and an hour from the other, shouldn't they have that option?
Well, it's not that simple. So they have a district of residency, and their district of residency is currently either Roscoe or Livingston Manor, wherever that parent is, that you were talking to. Alan, you may have to put your state ID on for a minute, your old state ID on. But district boundaries, it's a very complicated, time-consuming task to redraw district boundaries. And the district boundaries for a merged district in this case would be the current Roscoe and Manor boundaries. Now, if there's a case to be made for a logistical, logical kind of situation, I don't know. Is there a process for that?
Yeah, there's a process, but the reality of it is, if this person were to go to school in Downsville, they're proper. Okay, okay.
Yeah.
So these people who are much closer to Downsville than they are to Roscoe, the only way they can go to Downsville is if they reside in the Downsville district. So the question is, could you take that property and move it to Downsville? Well, you could, but no district is going to give up that property and the property tax revenue that comes with those parcels to let kids go to another district. It's just, they're not gonna.
Fairness, the property tax is already in those districts, except for school taxes are going to buses.
School taxes, right, school taxes, I stand corrected, school taxes, right. So, I mean, districts are very reluctant to just agree to move property to another district, they just don't do that.
There's a process, but it's unlikely.
Yeah.
Other questions on the concept?
I'm going to get back to my previous question. These figures you gave us for the total program is on top of the existing transportation issues that we have now,
That's correct.
right?
Correct.
If we continue to keep transportation issues that we have now, most of the districts, the time change may have to be a little changed around a little bit. brought that into the district. Then you shuttle whatever you want to shuttle as a high school student, however you want to shuttle one way or another. I think the savings would be a lot less than what it is here. The cost factor would be a lot less. I don't know that, but I haven't studied that. It seems to my mind that if you continue the same transportation program that you have now, with a little bit of time change for the shuttle program to work, then whoever you want to shuttle high school wants to work that program out will be a less cost factor.
So let me just be clear, Ellen, on what you're saying, and I think I understand. So I think we're going back to your earlier suggestion, right? That the elementary kids stay where they are today.
Correct.
And the only people being shuttled would be the 7 through 12 students.
Whatever you want to do with it.
Then the answer to your question is yes, absolutely. The shuttle cost would be reduced.
So when we come back to these situations, presenting this thing, I don't know how you're going to study.
Yeah.
Doing the homework.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be a matter of Alan going back to his stuff, and will they fit? I think that's gonna be the question, is will Roscoe 712, Livingston Manor 712, and Livingston Manor,
What do you want to do with them?
would they fit in this building? I believe would be the first step in that process.
Yeah.
And if they'll fit, then yes, I would at the same time revise the transportation shuttle cost. Sure.
So if the new classroom were to be in Livingston Manor, obviously this is the project, soon we have to build a road, which is going to be attached. So how would that flow to?
I mean, for those of you that may not have heard her question, the question is she's speaking as a Roscoe student, right? A lot of the upperclassmen in Roscoe currently drive themselves to school. They don't use the school buses. And if those children were now driving to Livingston Manor, it's additional time, it's additional money, it's additional opportunities for an accident, right? So, and you're asking about the effect of that. And would they continue to be allowed to drive, right? So again, in a merged district, there would be one set of rules for students as well. And so whatever the agreed upon rule, it's okay for upperclassmen to drive, and we have parking, and here's the rules and all of that stuff, then they would be allowed to drive, and I don't think that additional distance would have any bearing on it. Interesting question.
In studies that you've done in districts that ended up merging, are you aware of situations, so kind of what your recommendation is right now is the shuttle thing, where that occurred in year 1 of the new district, but in year 2, changes were made and things were moved around because it made more sense after, putting stuff together and seeing what worked and what didn't work? Are you aware of things like that?
I am not aware, I can't cite you an example where that has happened, but that's exactly what should happen, is that you have to start somewhere. And to start, this would be an option for starting. And like the very last, I got ahead of myself, but the very last thing that I said here, and that's exactly, I think what your question is getting at, is that it is really critical that as that first year progresses, people are going to gain a better understanding of where things can be improved, what really doesn't work at all, let's not do that anymore, what can we do instead? Where are these opportunities that's going to improve the experience for the kids? And yeah, I would say, John, absolutely, that's exactly what should happen. And I'm pretty sure that the people that work with transportation every day, and that includes the drivers and everybody else, are going to be pretty quick to give feedback and say, listen, this is something I've observed. I think we could do it better if we do this. And I would hope that that's what would be occurring throughout that first year, so that going into year 2, those modifications might be implemented, and then that continues and just gets better and better as if enrollment changes and residencies, locations of houses change, any of those things. It's very much a moving target.
And I know you mentioned it, and there's not a slide for it, the two-tiered system, which, for those that don't understand what that is, that would be where the elementary school and the middle high school started at different times, and the same
The
group
bus-
of buses. So if the elementary school started at 7:30, buses ran around, picked up the elementary kids, brought them back. Soon as they were done there, they went out and picked up the middle high school kids, brought them to the other building. That way there isn't the shuttling piece. You said you would talk to Rolling B about that, but they didn't do a cost projection.
Yeah, that's just a whole other level of analysis. And there's also a lot of programmatic impact there around different start times for different buildings and all of that. And the districts work every day, all the time, all over the place. But Rolling Green did not feel that they had the capacity right now to take that look and run that hypothetical situation. I don't know if it's more, honestly, I don't know if it would cost more or less, and I think that's kind of what they were saying, is that it's hard to tell. I mean, you're gonna increase, it's hard because you're weighing the use of vehicles. You're running the same vehicle twice, you're not, maybe you don't need, I'll pick a number and say 10 big buses to run all those routes. Maybe you now only need 5, but you're going twice. You know what I mean? So as far as the vehicles go, the drivers typically, sometimes drivers like that because it's more hours in the day. I don't know how that impacts Rolling Green's, staffing situation. I don't know any of those things.
And my last one. So in studies that we've done where districts merge, that use this shuttling concept, did they stick with that or did that get phased out?
I don't know. I would have to make this call because I can't.
The two-tier structures were pursued.
We have, I believe Liberty, Fallsburg, and Solid West all have a two-tier system.
Any other questions, comments before we break up into smaller? Yes.
Before it's vote, have this figured out before it's vote on it, or just have to figure out.
You do not have to have it figured out. We of course like to be able to give as much information to the voters as we possibly can, which is why we go through the exercise of assuming it's going to cost something and assuming it may be more time on buses, which I believe would be, worst case scenario. If we can do better, awesome. But we're not going to sugarcoat it and, kind of to Jessica's point about, saying one thing and then it turns out very differently. That's the approach that we've taken. But so it does not have to be finalized before it can be voted upon. Do you have a question?
I work at Sullivan County Board, so our career tech program deals with shuttles, and I can tell you that it's a disaster on a daily basis. And that the students actually lose time in the classroom because they have to be shuttled to that alternate location. We have like 3 alternate locations that they have to go to depending on their programs. I also had the privilege of being housed at the Liberty Central School District, and they have where all of their elementary and high school students get picked up at the same time. Then the bus goes directly to the elementary school, drops off all of its elementary students, drives up and drops all of the high school students off. Same thing in the afternoon, the buses all go to the elementary school, pick up all the elementary students, and then go up to the high school. Is that something that's?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I don't know if you heard that or not, but instead of using a shuttle, keep the kids on the same bus. You're not moving between buses. This is a situation that we had in one of the other studies we did. So, and it's not like you have 25 bus routes either. You've got, single digit number of bus routes. And so the question is, can you take what's the current Roscoe kids, go out just like you do now, drop the elementary school kids in Roscoe, leave those same kids on the bus, run all of your buses over to Livingston Manor, drop the high school kids there, and then be done with your, yes, that's absolutely an option. I think Rolling felt that was gonna be more costly. I don't know that, but it's absolutely an option that the district could explore. And I will circle back with them and ask them that question.
So my comment, piggybacking on that, which is definitely safer for students, a lot of the elementary literacy and management students walk or are driven by parents. So if the parents aren't willing to drive the extra 7 miles, would Rolling be, and part of this answer, but would they pick up kids in town as they were going to the afternoon? So they wouldn't have to walk. Somewhere.
I think this goes to the concept of when, you know, we asked Rolling B what a two-tier model looked like. There's a lot of moving parts. So the only actual information that they have to give us these examples are what's currently taking place. And every year by April 1st, people have to say whether they want a bus or not. This changes every year. So, you know, this is based on our current ridership, which if the buildings are going to be used differently, you know, those numbers are most likely going to change based on the fact of where a child would be going to school. So these are for example purposes based on what's currently happening. And that's why, you know, to go to Melissa's questions, are we going to have the answers of what it's going to look like before people vote on it, or is this stuff that gets figured out after people vote? You know, these are a lot of those moving parts that are really going to have to be if things go through, it's working all those details out. And the shuttling piece is an option to get things moving in the beginning, and then looking at staggered start times, changing things. So while we're talking, I actually just communicated with Rolling B and Nick and Phil and asked about, you know, could we possibly get what a two-tier system looks like, you know, making a lot of assumptions. So just like this is a snapshot in time of what's happening, they're going to work with us to get what a two-tier system may look like, but it's for informational, you know, this is a possibility based on the information we have now, assuming that buildings were used for X, Y, and Z. So it's not an absolute, but at least it's another example that we can look at on the screen and discuss. And so we're gonna work with them on, you know, trying to have something at least we can look at to compare the two.
Just to reiterate, they've been super helpful and responsive and all of that, but to your question, specifically, the elementary kids in Livingston Manor would qualify for transportation to their school.
Right.
Which
So
would
then
now be in
those
Roswell.
siblings would be within the mile of the building and could walk, but the little ones would be.
And they would have, you know,
It would be 8 miles.
at the pickup point, they wouldn't have to get to the school, it would be at their designated pickup point. Yeah. Other questions or comments? Okay, I think with that, get up, move around a little bit, reconvene. Take the next slide that I think I don't know what's. Yeah, just if you would, you know, take maybe, how long will it take? 5, 6 minutes, 5, 6 minutes. I think we can do it pretty succinctly. And we'll reconvene, we'll give it 5 minutes just to keep moving.
Alan here. I was just curious, I thought it odd that we didn't bring up the prospect of an entirely new campus. A sort of cost analysis side by side with reusing new 80-year-old schools. And I just thought that was odd.
Yeah, and I am going to, Alan, of course, stepped out to the men's room, and I'm going to hold that question. It's a great question. I'm going to hold that until he comes back, because he did the majority of the work on the facilities pieces. So I don't want to misspeak or speak on his behalf, but we will absolutely circle back to that question. Any other takeaways from the transportation and the facilities pieces? Yes, thank you.
Trial and error. Doesn't have to use that cell for what we work on. A lot to figure out. Figure out along the way. That answer.
Yes.
Okay, we'll have a long walk ride. So, a lot of stuff to do that.
So to paraphrase, and I should I take the microphone around? That's not what I should do.
Oh, yeah.
To paraphrase what Melissa just said is that there are a lot of moving parts, both in facilities and transportation, and it's not going to be done day one if a merger occurs, and that will be an ongoing process of evaluation, reevaluation, adjusting, and constant kind of checking in and monitoring, making changes as needed. Yeah. Anybody else want to share? If not, we'll put Ellen on the spot before he even sits down.
I had 3 main points that I connected from all the slides. So the first one is that neither school has the facilities to house all of the students right now, so both have to be used. But Livingston Manor seems to be a better prospect for the secondary school students, which would be Roscoe as the building for the primary school students. And for like the last section, it's like the transportation. Obviously the transportation routes and times are gonna have to change, but both of the schools use a similar tier system right now. And that would be the most plausible option moving forward if there were to be a merger.
Thank you very much. To follow up on that, as John mentioned, we are going to do a little bit more, Rolly B is going to do a little more work with us and for us on helping us maybe develop some of those other options. Any other comments before I hand this back to Ellen that he doesn't even know I'm going to do? Ellen, Justin asked a question about was there consideration given to building a new school and it's kind of expecting to see a side-by-side comparison.
There was, we had what I would call very preliminary conversations with a couple of people about, should we even explore this as an option? That option being that if there was ever a time to build a new school and not continue to invest in 80-year-old buildings, given this incentive for building, this is the time. And from the few people that we talked to, both said, that's probably a non-starter in this community, that the current buildings are very important to the residents and probably don't need to go there. Now, I will tell you that we have explored that in other studies. That's the only reason we did not put it on the table of those preliminary, sacred cow type of conversations. No other reason. But if there's interest on the part of the committee in steering us in that direction, that's certainly something we can take a look at. That's why we haven't.
Probably safe to say, we kind of had summary slides up there all along on these areas, so
Okay.
maybe you want to just kind of recap where we are and what you're thinking.
Well, yes, we just try, we kind of made an executive decision that it does not make any sense to start the staffing piece at 20 minutes to 9. So since we're going to do the second half of that next time anyways, We're gonna pass on that tonight. If you look at your handouts, you can see that there's some preliminary data presented on the staffing piece. We're gonna follow up on that at the next meeting anyways. So we're, Deb and I are done presenting for the evening. Don't clap too loudly.
We have a question from the
So I think what
viewing
we'd like
public.
to do is use this time, first of all, to go to the committee and give you an opportunity. Any last comments or questions you'd like to make about anything? Then we do have a question from a remote observer. We can take that. And then we're certainly happy to open up for questions and comments from the audience on stuff we did tonight or anything else. And again, Deb and I will hang around after we finish this part of the comment Q&A section if anybody would like to talk with us one-on-one. So let's start with the committee. Committee, last chance, questions or comments or reactions to the question about we should at least study the implications of a new K-12 facility. If you want to comment on anything or that.
All right, I think it's far good. You know, all the problems with the private funding, they tear it over, everything else. The state may say it's a good time to build, with the money to do back. The process for learning to build, we basically, that's my personal opinion. I know, this is kind of my windows, you know, where you're at the lights. How long it takes to build a school?
Painstaking is an understatement, but having said that, even under the best of times, let's say you decide that you're going to merge, and let's say you're going to undertake the development of a brand new campus. From that moment, it's probably 4 to 5 years before a shovel is in the ground. That, when you think about design time with an architect, all of the financial planning that has to go on, and we discussed a little bit before in terms of cost allowance, letting contracts, I mean, it is an incredibly complex process. So while I agree, Alan, with your assessment, this is 3 to 4 years down the road at best. So
I also understand that the other situation, you have two beautiful buildings here. You know, if you build a new building someplace, where will they take it? What are you gonna do with these two buildings?
okay.
When Alan says we talk about small group, that was in the initial conversations when we first met with the boards.
Yeah.
That was kind of one of the, you know, when they asked for direction from the boards, neither board felt that there would be a lot of support for building the building. That was kind of why they didn't put that in there, because from a board level, exactly to your point, both communities have beautiful school buildings that are in relatively good shape, that they didn't think that was a house.
Yeah.
I don't think either community wants to build anything. Like, that's just. Only other big comment is just in the tour of buildings and facilities, which is really the first opportunity that I've had in a long time while in the school. I was impressed. I mean, there'd be a lot of new opportunities for us. Some facilities. Yeah, there's some great spaces.
Thank you. Any other committee members? Okay, oh, sorry.
I apologize for the meeting. I would be remiss if I didn't say this, and it goes back to what Justin had said earlier on in the facilities portion, which was about the amount of money that it would take to go ahead and tackle some of these bigger projects here in Livingston. It's quite understandable that you might, as a Rossville taxpayer, be hesitant to maybe want to vote yes, because then you're taking on these sorts of things, but the comment that I would say I would have to make is, you know, your taxes go to plenty of other things, that you're probably not aware of. You don't drive on every road that your taxes go to fix. So I feel as though if you're going to take on a project like this, you have to stop looking at it as a us versus them, or it's their project, not our project. Why should I pay for that if I don't live in that town? So,
Thank you. That's very insightful. And what you will find, what you'll find, I think, is that if this process moves forward, that doesn't mean it gets voted on, doesn't mean it gets approved, but as people have more and more serious conversations about it, okay, am I clear? We're not talking about it being approved, just people come together saying, oh, Mayor, what do you think? What would this look like? What might that look like? As you go down that road, you'll notice that people's perspective will start to change from ours to our district to our single district to our merged district. You'll see that happening, and that takes time. But if the discussions become more serious, you'll hear people talking like that. It's very, very common for that to happen. Anybody else, committee? How about our, who's there? Remote question?
Remote question,
Yeah,
sure.
that's it. You want me to read it? Oh. It's regarding transportation. So are you saying children in the Livingston Manor School District will be transported directly to Roscoe from their home or pickup location? Or will they be stopping at Livingston Manor and then be transported to Roscoe from there? Increasing 20+ minutes away from Roscoe Central School and possibly exceeding to 1.5 hours if they do not stop at Livingston Manor.
Yeah, so could you all hear the question? It's kind of the same question that, you know, I think is on a lot of people's minds. So I think the answer, if I process all the question right, is yes. The students that, elementary students in Livingston Manor, as it's presented tonight, would be transported to Roscoe. How that occurs is a subject that we're still exploring a little bit. And whether that's extension of an existing route and everybody, you know, they stay on their bus and they ride to Roscoe, or whether they use a shuttle, or whether we really go in a different direction and look at a two-tier system. But whatever one is chosen, then yeah, the elementary students currently attending Livingston Manor in the scenario we've shared tonight would be transported to Roscoe. Or did that answer what they were asking?
I think so.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so then we want to invite any questions or comments from the audience, and thank you for your patience and your willingness to have the committee function tonight. Thank you for that. But now it's your chance. Any comments or questions that anyone would like to share?
We could do a fundraiser for that bridge out there, like the old people did back then. Everybody got together and did stuff together. That would help this bridge over here that needs to be fixed. I don't know how much it is. We could do fundraisers for both towns. Right, but I'm just saying.
All the way up to Jane, and there are lots of things that we're trying to.
That's a lot of chocolate chip cookies. How about other comments or questions?
to, they would not have to walk to the school building. Maybe that may be a choice that people make, that they would be entitled to a ride from their pickup point, which I think in most cases it looks pretty much, as I looked at the routes, it's door to door for the most part. I don't think you have central pickup points very much. So they would be entitled to a ride from home to their school of attendance if they distance qualify. So in other words, if let's, I don't know which district, but let's say they're currently living in Livingston Manor, they're in the village, they walk now. If they're elementary age kids and they would now be attending elementary school in Roscoe, they would be entitled to a ride from home to Roscoe.
They decide to walk.
And also the kids that are, one of those. So they're at least matter in the last one.
I couldn't hear the beginning of the question, I'm sorry.
So the kids that are in the doses, they go to Roscoe, and say, elementary age kids, we go to Roscoe, and then on the bus, and Roscoe back.
Not necessarily, I would not think so. I don't know how they're transported now, but I would think they would go, if they're out, you're saying it's an out of district location that they go to school at? Yeah, I would say they would get picked up at home and they would be taken to their out of district school. They would not need to come into the main campus.
Then I'm correct in that, the distance, the walking distance set by board policy, that's building specific. So if the districts were to merge, that policy now apply to the school building in which the kids.
It's right.
So regardless of, they're all in the same district, but back to your point, if it's an elementary kid that is now going to go to Roscoe, they're obviously more than a mile from Roscoe, so we could get door-to-door pickup. If it's a kid currently getting direct transport through a BOCES program, that wouldn't change by a shuttling process to the school building. They would still have that direct transport from home to a BOCES program. It could just be if there's more than one kid now going to that program, that bus picks up two kids and goes to BOCES instead of just a one-off shot. Is that?
Exactly, no, that's exactly right.
Okay, so under the model that the gentleman, I'm not sure, but the gentleman mentioned that we're looking to as well, where each elementary stays in their own homeschool, and then all of the 7 to 12 from one, most likely in a building. Doesn't that then make Roscoe building very empty? And if that's the case, could we then look, since you're going to be looking into that possibility of doing like pre-K4, like elementary in each building? One of the buildings, I made like the middle school, 5 to 8 combined, and then 9 to 12 being housed in one of the buildings. I just think if you put all of the 7 to 12 in one building, it just leaves that other building what looks like pretty empty. So just another option that I would just.
So just to put some hypothetical numbers to that. So what we're piggybacking off Alan's suggestion. So we leave PK4, we'll say. PK4 Roscoe stays in Roscoe, PK4 Manor stays in Manor, right? And then maybe we have a 5-8 middle school, and that would be in Roscoe, we'll say, or a 5-7 because you may not have room for 4th grade. So let's say it's 5-7, 8, 12 stays in Manor. Could you look at that? Yeah, that's something you can absolutely look at. Yes.
To piggyback off that question, Alan's concept, does that now necessitate going back to the staffing piece? Because in your original projection for staffing, you assumed that all the elementary and all of the staff associated with elementary would be in the same building. In a scenario where you're using elementary in both places, you're going to need duplicate. Since both buildings are K-12 now, you have a lot of ancillary staff that are shared. Is that change your staffing?
Yeah, the first area of analysis for whether or not that's a good idea will be staffing. I mean, what you'll hear at the next meeting is money in school districts is not in books and materials. It's not even in school buses, it's in people. And so the first analysis about whether or not Alan's idea makes sense is what are the staffing implications going to be? And if you are not able to realize the efficiencies that we talked about last time, and you are not able to reduce the teaching positions, you gotta deal with the fact that that's no longer a savings. And, you know, an $80,000 transportation bill is frankly pretty small compared to what staff cost. And that's what we'll talk about next time. So that's exactly where it'll start. What would the elementary classrooms look like if you had 2 elementary schools? Exactly where it started.
You wouldn't be involved in the same staffing process? I mean, you're keeping elementary where they are, you know, and you have staff there. I mean, I'm not in the teaching staff.
No, that's why I asked that question, because we don't know.
Okay.
Because what we talked about the last meeting was.
Right, I know.
Yeah.
So the process is you're gonna look at this whole thing, see what it amounts to. It's not only you gotta be able to keep them there, it's gotta be staffing, it's gotta be transportation.
Yes, the total package.
So what we're here for is a process. We want to get the process is supposed to be efficient as possible.
Right, because,
The input is there, so let's do the study.
right, and that's the whole purpose of this process. There's a scenario, what does it look like, what does it cost?
Okay.
That way, you know, when the final recommendation comes out, it goes to state ed and the boards are deciding what it is that's gonna be put out to the community. Is it scenario A, scenario B, scenario C? And this is exactly what the purpose of this committee was. You know, that it's to take feedback from this group to steer Alan and Deb to help find us the information that we want as 2 communities to determine whether this is the direction that's best for Roscoe and Livingston.
So we'll do a study with a pre-K report, like I said in January, and then for 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th is also on the high school. Can you give us a study on that? Because there's a lot of people that would like to see that in both communities, keeping the pre-K report in each town.
Yeah, we can look at that.
Because I heard that from the Savannah people, from Roscoe people, and January. And I did see now.
Yep.
And kids being on the bus an hour or so, and kids living on hills, traveling back and forth with the shuttle. You know.
I talked to Phil and Dan, and we're gonna have a 2-tier scenario for us for our next meeting on the 28th.
Little buses going that distance, working on push, whatever.
Okay,
My voice had 3 shovels.
I'm sorry.
My niece is in the time for 6:30. They drop them off in back, middle school and back at high school.
So that's that example would be the 3-tier system.
That's what we want to do for, figure out how to get the kids to those.
Okay, other comments, questions from the audience? Okay, what else?
See you on the 28th, I think.
Yeah, 28th.
If you haven't signed in on the attendance notepad that I think I now
It's in
have.
the-
Okay,
yes.
if you somehow came in a little bit later and haven't signed that, I would appreciate it if you hop down here before you leave and sign in.
28th, it's in Roscoe, no tour.
No tour.
We've done a tour in both buildings, so the meeting will start at 6 on Tuesday, the 28th in Roscoe. Okay? Thank you for
Thanks,
being here.
everybody.